What's happening, guys and girls? Acrinator here, and welcome to another video. Today we'll be addressing the recent sprint through one of a few single-player titles we did toward the end of last year for the solo Let's Plays. Personally, I'd like to get more of these backlogged analyses out of the way before starting any more series, which is why I've been doing more casual live streams than usual as of late. Regardless, this has been about 2 months in the making, so without any further ado, let's dive straight into this review of Bastion. For those of you who've never heard of the company SuperGiant, well, I'd have to ask what rock you've been living under for the past couple of years. SuperGiant has made quite the name for themselves by making single-player RPGs in a time when larger companies try to claim that these sort of experiences are long dead. At right about the same time that Minecraft, Skyrim, and the Nintendo 3DS were practically taking over the world of gaming, a small independent game studio was working together with Warner Brothers to publish their first title. The vivid aesthetic, beautiful soundtrack, and unique form of narration as the player progressed captured the early attention of some. But it wouldn't be until a bit later after the release that it would be given multiple awards in various categories, and become a prime example of the quality of work that could come out of the indie scene. Bastion is a top-down-esque action role-playing game developed by SuperGiant Games, as I stated before, and published by Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment. The game was originally released in July of 2011 for the Xbox and PC, later coming to PlayStation and even mobile devices. This project would go on to cement SuperGiant as one of the top small developers in the industry, and as of January 2015, 3 years ago, sold over 3 million copies across all platforms. The first thing most people notice when looking at pictures or videos from Bastion would be how the game looks. The developers wanted to create a painted look to their game, giving it a handcrafted feel. Everything from the player character to the inanimate objects have been given an incredible amount of effort in the detailing. Nothing feels out of place in the world, and despite the vibrancy of your surroundings, it never feels overwhelming. This is very important to someone like me because it's very common with popular titles nowadays to go a bit overboard on the visuals and overload the senses. For example, the Rise of the Tomb Raider game focuses so much on how photorealistic everything has to look that it actually harms the game in more ways than one. Not just in the optimization department, but effects such as bloom and motion blur make it more difficult to appreciate your surroundings. Thankfully, Bastion manages to tone the dial down a bit, at the very least enough to enjoy all the hard work that went into such a painstakingly crafted environment. And what I find even more incredible in this regard is that, for all intents and purposes, Bastion is somewhat minimalistic. That's not meant as an insult, obviously, but when you look at the levels, they're simply floating islands over top a moving background image. The graphical artists managed to add so much life and character into their work while filling in just enough for the player to interact with. If it's unnecessary, it likely doesn't exist in this game. In more than just still images though, Bastion performs incredibly well in how everything moves as well. Movements by you and the enemies you face feel very fluid and easy to follow. Regardless of how skilled you are, there shouldn't be any times where you have difficulty keeping up with what's going on in front of you. Such a short section, because how much can one possibly talk about the sound design for a game? But while it is true that there's only so much I can express here, I feel this is one of the most significant aspects of Bastion, and all of SuperGiant's work for that matter. Darren Korb and the rest of the team behind the sounds that go into these games is just brilliant. There's no other way to put it. Very few people exist in this world that can capture an exact emotion that's going on through a player's head and then personify that feeling with their music. You needn't listen any further than the background music to this video to hear snippets of the genius to which I'm referring. In every single one of SuperGiant's 3 games, they're given the user-defined tag of great soundtrack, and if that wasn't enough on their own, then the multiple awards they've earned should be enough to supplement such a claim. This is a bit smaller in degree than the background music that manages to take a massive foreground such as this, but the sounds belonging to the various enemies is also incredibly well designed. The further you progress through the campaign, the stronger the enemies become. During the jungle stages, you come across enemies that are adept at hiding until the moment they strike, only revealing their presence beforehand by their signature call. Anyone who's played through Bastion at least once will quickly recognize the sounds of the most dangerous enemies, immediately leading them to a particular course of action. Such an inanimate tool is incredibly useful and quite clever in terms of design when conditioning the player to do what you want them to without them ever realizing it. When first starting the game, you as the player character are left completely in the dark. You have absolutely no idea who you're playing as, what's happening to the world around you, why you're being attacked by these random enemies, what you're supposed to be doing, or why there's an old man narrating your every move. This isn't entirely new, as plenty of other games in the past have you starting from zero as you slowly learn about your surroundings, though in this regard Bastion does subvert most expectations by keeping the energy level at a relative low. Usually games would begin to pick things up a bit while working towards introducing the main antagonizing force and explaining the basic mechanics. SuperGiant instead went for an approach where you're gradually discovering the world underneath your feet, both figuratively and literally. Despite the narration leading you to believe that you're perpetually reliving these events as they're being told, you only ever learn more about the greater lore of the game as it becomes crucially relevant. You don't learn about the other races of people that exist in the world until you come across one of their kind, and you only realize how horribly they were treated by your own society after they lash out. In such a short runtime of about 4 hours, Bastion manages to script an unbelievably multifaceted story of chaos, tragedy, betrayal, and ultimately hope. If I haven't stressed enough the fact that SuperGiant is great at everything they do, take home with you this one point: the stories they craft are practically unparalleled. Thankfully, for the most part, Bastion feels responsive while playing. It may take getting hit a few times by your standard enemy before discovering how best to approach the obstacle, but there's very few moments that break you down without a moment to regain your composure. Though while far and few between, these moments do indeed exist. The various boss fights are prime examples of this, often introducing a new enemy with little to no explanation of what it does. That in and of itself is fine, given that it doesn't take too much brain power to surmise what you're supposed to do, though it can become problematic when these enemies give you little to no time to react. As you can see by the footage of this unicorn worm thing, it nearly takes perfect timing to dodge the incoming attack and retaliate with enough precision to dole out any damage. Keep in mind that I always complete any game prior to Let's Playing it on the channel, so the stream footage you're watching now is that of someone prepared to face such an enemy. Even so, it was mildly difficult, much more so the first time I played through Bastion. I would like to mention the significance of such fights being minor, however, since the general combat experience throughout the standard playthrough won't be so trying. These boss encounters can be tricky, but they shouldn't have enough oomph to stop you dead in your tracks. One aspect of the gameplay that can become quite frustrating over time would be the introduction of newer weapons to your arsenal. You may be perplexed at how the concept of more diversity in attack methods is a negative here, to which I say that it's not the variety that I hold against Bastion, just how said weapons are introduced to you. For all intents and purposes, any weapon can be viable at any point in the game. You can very easily use the hammer and repeater you first find through to the finale, which is exactly what I tried to do for the most part. Emphasis on tried to do. Unfortunately, as you stumble across new and exciting ways to maim any who would oppose you, you're forced to switch to these weapons regardless of your preference. It doesn't matter if you enjoyed using the tools you've previously discovered, the game wants you to use the latest and greatest gear, at least for the time being. You can switch back to your handy-dandy weapons of choice when you return to the hub area, but you're stuck with a kit you'd rather not use for the remainder of whatever level you found it in. A much better way to go about this would be to allow the player to complete a small test run for each new weapon, and then decide whether they'd want to switch or remain with what they already have. Granted, for most discoverable artifacts in your armory, they aren't too bad to deal with, but certain weapons like the bow are painful to operate. The only other grievance I could bring up about Bastion would be the movement, and that's only a minor grievance at that. While rolling does increase your mobility greatly, giving you the chance to dodge away from most enemy attacks, it also creates some hilariously awful missteps. Having the world as a fragmented mess of floating islands does not work in your favor. Luckily, falling over the edge doesn't constitute a game over, though you do respawn with a considerable chunk of your health missing. When in the midst of larger wave or boss encounters, this can put you at an incredible disadvantage. While you should have enough resources to restore your health, you're likely going to need such items as your health potions without falling off the map, let alone when you take into account such occurrences. Now, I would like to note again that all of the problems I've mentioned thus far, while certainly noticeable, are by no means game-breaking. Bastion is a glorious piece of work that deserves the utmost praise and respect when taking into account the whole gameplay experience. It's nearly flawless, and the few issues it does have are minuscule at best. It's for these reasons that I find myself giving SuperGiant's Bastion a 9.9 out of 10. This is one of the best games I've ever taken the time to play, and likely the highest score I'll ever give a game on this channel, given that I probably won't ever give World of Warcraft such a formal review. At the time of recording this, you can pick up Bastion on PC as well as most other consoles for $14.99 or your regional equivalent, though it is worth noting that the game usually goes on sale during Steam's summer and winter sales, so it might be worth waiting depending on how much you're willing to spend on a game with about 4 hours of playtime. I simply can't recommend this game enough. It's hard to believe that this was SuperGiant's first project, but regardless, it's a masterpiece if I've ever played one. I can also recommend the official soundtrack for those who, like me, just simply can't get enough of this work. Anyways, if you enjoyed this formal review, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more like it, maybe even subscribe. Links to my social media and whatnot are in the description below, and that's all the time I've got for today, so until next time, don't die.